Hello. So first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. Usually when I speak at FREC, I'm speaking about probabilistic automata, but I will leave this pleasure to the next speaker, Nathanael Fijalkov, and I will speak about my favorite topic, stochastic games, which is more general than probabilistic automata. I will present to you recent work, a recent result that we obtained with Edon Kelmendi. He is my PhD student, together with François Dufour from INRIA Bordeaux Sud-Ouest, funded by LabEx CPU. So today I will try to convince you that two-player perfect information shift invariant submixing stochastic games are half positional. And first of all, I will have to define all those words. Okay. First, I will recall what are stochastic games with perfect information, which is the framework of the talk. Then I will tell you about the technical core of our new result, the existence of epsilon subgame perfect strategies under generic conditions. And then I will explain why this existence implies this long title I told you about. Okay. I will start with an example. We will start with a game with no players, a zero-player game, which is a Markov chain. Okay. So it's a very simple Markov chain with two states. Okay. The +1 state and the -1 state. And what does happen? So we are running the Markov chain for an infinite time. Okay. So we go in between the two states. And when you are on the left state, you can either stay there or go right with equal probability half. Okay. And when you are on the right state, you can either stay there with probability 1 minus x or go left with probability x. Okay. Basic example. And when you play a game, usually you want to optimize, you want to maximize the payoff. You have an objective. Okay. So here, the payoffs +1 and -1, they are used to define the objectives. Okay. And there are several ways to do this. Okay. I will not list all the possible ways, but I will give two examples. The first one is what is called the class of mean payoff games. In that case, what we are interested in is the average payoff. Okay? And it's a basic exercise to check that if you run this Markov chain for a long time, you will converge to what is called a stationary distribution. Okay? So you will mix all possible paths, and on average, you will have a certain probability to be left, certain probability to be right, and it's quite easy to compute with a linear system. Okay? And you can easily deduce that your average payoff is x minus 1/2 over x plus 1/2. Okay? So mean payoff zero-player games boils down to solving linear systems. Even on the zero-player games, there can be more interesting behaviors related to random walks. For example, if I am interested in counter games, they were recently studied by Etesami, by Kuchera, and they are defined like this. We are interested in the behavior of the partial sum of rewards. Okay? So instead of taking the average, I take the sum. Okay? And then I'm interested in the limit behavior, so I take, for example, the infimum limit of the partial sum. Okay? And here you can check that there are two possible situations. If x is strictly greater than 1/2, then you will spend more time on the left, and your partial sum will diverge to +infinity, almost surely. And otherwise, it will diverge, or your partial sum won't be bounded from below, so the limit will be -infinity. Okay? So two examples of games that I will talk about throughout this talk. Okay? Now an example of a two-player game. So now let's have some action and let's take some decisions. Okay, it's a new example of the perish or publish game. Okay, that you all of you are playing it. Okay, from time to time. Okay, so we are playing the publish or perish game, and there are two players, the writer and the referee. Okay, and the goal of the writer, of course, is to publish and not to perish. And for that, the writer, as is facing a decision, he can either try to publish in a journal or in a conference. Okay? If he decides to submit his paper to a conference, then you know there is this random process of reviewing papers. Okay? More or less random depending on the conference. Okay. So let's say he has 0.49 chance to perish and 0.51 chance to publish. Okay? So it's not that bad. Or he can try the more elaborate process of publishing, sending the paper to a journal. Okay? And if he sends the paper to a journal, he's facing this anonymous referee, which is an enemy. Okay? Hidden in the dark. So there may be a random move if the referee is not selected by the editor. But if the referee is selected by the editor, the writer is facing his enemy. Okay? And here the referee has three choices. He can decide to sleep. Okay? Maybe he will be contacted again by the editor, but he can try to delay the publication like this. Okay? And after some time, we will have publish or perish. Or he can write a positive review. Okay? And then with half chance, the paper will be published, or half chance it will be perished. Or he can ask for revisions and give back the hand to the writer. Okay? So the question is, what are the optimal strategies of the players? And if you analyze the game, especially if you know that simple strategies are enough to play this kind of games, that you don't need memory, you can check that the optimal strategy for the writer is send his paper to a conference, and the referee should write positive reviews. Okay? Of course, any resemblance with existing data or people is not my responsibility. Okay. In general, we have a very simple and nice formal way to study stochastic games with perfect information. So in the talk, I will restrict to stochastic games with perfect information. It means that players, they take their decisions one after another, and they are perfectly informed about what's going on. Okay? They are perfectly informed on the state of the game, on the decisions taken by their opponents. If you remove this assumption, the situation is very different. In particular, we are a special case are probabilistic automata that you will be talked about in the next talk. Okay, but in the case of perfect information, what do we have? We have two players. We have states, partitioned into states controlled by the first or the second player. We have an initial state. We have some actions. So players, they play choosing actions. So you remember in the slides before, actions were sent to a conference, sent to a journal, sleep, write an OK review, and so on. And we have transition probabilities, like this, okay, which is simply a mapping from states and actions to probability distribution over states. Okay? So if you fix an action in each state, you get back to a Markov chain, to a zero-player game. And the goal of player one is to choose actions such that the play, the infinite play, which results of the interaction, maximizes some objective, which is a payoff function. Okay? So in general, in an abstract way, a payoff function is a mapping from infinite sequences of states to rewards. Okay? But you have seen several examples, mean payoff games, counter games, or reachability games for the publish or perish game. And players, they take their decisions using strategies. So mappings which tell them, given the past of the play, given the final play, what to do next. Okay? Given the sequence of states seen so far, what should I do? This is a plan of action, this is a strategy. And if you fix the two strategies, there are no more players. Okay? There is no more freedom in choosing actions. So we are back to a Markov chain, to a zero-player game. And we can measure probabilities that events happen, like in the usual theory of Markov chains with countable state space. Okay? So this I won't define more precisely, but intuitively it's clear what's happening. And the goal of player one, now that we have this notion of strategy, is to maximize his expected payoff. So it chooses a strategy sigma that maximizes this expected payoff given the initial state, his strategy, and the strategy of the opponent. Okay. So what is not clear here is, okay, where does tau comes from? What makes things clear is a very fundamental result by Martin, the second Martin theorem, which defines the notion of value and shows that this whole framework makes sense. So the theorem of Martin is the following. For every stochastic game, actually for every concurrent stochastic game, which is a more general framework than the framework I'm using here, but okay, it applies to the situation of perfect information games. For every stochastic game, if the payoff function is bounded and Borel measurable, which is quite a generic assumption, then we have this equality here, which is that if the first player maximizes over sigma and the second player minimizes over tau, this is the same result as if second player minimizes first and the first player maximizes second. Okay? How can we read this equality? Well, this inequality here is trivial. Why? Because intuitively, this is a situation where player one chooses a strategy, reveals it to his opponent, okay? And knowing sigma, the opponent has to choose a good answer, a good counter strategy to sigma, okay? So of course, it's better not to be the one that reveals the strategy, but the one whose the strategy is revealed to, okay? So that's why the payoff of player one will be smaller here than here, because here it will be in form of tau, okay? But the power of Martin's theorem is to say that if you choose the right sets of strategies, actually you have equality, okay? And this this common value is called the value of the state, okay? So this is fundamental. And as a corollary, what do we learn about strategy of players? Well, we know that for every epsilon, players have epsilon optimal strategy. So strategy that guarantee them to win at least the value of the state minus epsilon. Okay, so for each possible threshold, they can have a very good strategy, almost optimal up to that threshold. Okay, it's really a powerful theorem because, for example, it partially generalizes the Mertens-Neyman theorem about mean payoff games, which was a long open standing problem, okay, and which was solved with very ad hoc analytical techniques. And here Martin is giving a theorem in the full general framework of any payoff function which is Borel measurable. Okay, it is a way to weight this contribution. So as computer scientists, it's not the end of the story because, of course, it's good to know that some value exists, but we want to compute it. Okay? It's a usual reflex of a computer scientist. We want to compute the value and we want to compute the strategy. Okay? And so we want to solve questions like, what do the epsilon strategies look like? Can we compute them? And so on. Okay? So of course, in this general setting, it's hard to give general answers. We have to consider examples. So common examples with interest for the CS community are parity games. Okay, I won't define them here because I think most of you know what they are. If you know parity automata, you know them. So parity games were used to study tree automata, closure properties of tree languages defined by Bucci automata. One counter stochastic games were recently studied by Brajil, Brojek, and Ntesami. And I already gave you an example in the beginning. So each state is labeled with a reward between 0 in the set 0, -1, +1. And we are interested in the asymptotic behavior of the partial sum. So for example, the unboundedness problem is the supremum limit of the partial sum plus infinity, okay? Which means that your partial sum may oscillate, but the upper value is bigger and bigger. or divergence is the limit if equals to plus infinity, which means that the partial sum are converging to infinity. Okay? I think it's also of interest, this condition, for counter automata. Okay. I won't talk about automata here. Another examples of games, mean payoff games. So you have seen those already. So we are interested in the average sum. Positivity game, which is a bit different. The player one is maximizing the probability that the average value of the game of the play is strictly positive. Okay? So it's different to maximize this value on average and to maximize the probability that the average value is strictly positive. Of course, there are connections, but proof techniques are different. And generalized mean payoff games introduced by Raskin, Chatterjee, Doyen, and Singer, which is a generalization of positivity game, and which is defined by, so instead of using one set of rewards, we are using a finite number of different reward mappings. So we have different tuple of rewards on each state. And what we want to do, we want that at least one of the average value of one of the counter index is strictly positive. Okay, so we want that player one wants to maximize the probability that for some k, the average value on component k is strictly positive. Okay, so this has those 5 examples are various examples of games used in verification and automata theory. And there is a very interesting common property between those games, is that in all these games, player one has optimal positional strategy. Okay? Very simple optimal strategies. And also player two has optimal positional strategies in all these games, except for the generalized mean payoff game. Okay? What is a positional strategy? It's a very nice strategy. It's simply a mapping from states to actions. So you don't need to use memory when you play positionally. Okay? Instead of having a mapping from sequences to actions, you have a mapping from state to action. So this is nice because this is a finite object. It's much easier to handle algorithmically, and that's a motivation. Actually, positional strategies are the main ingredient of many algorithms to solve stochastic games and compute their values. Okay, so that's the motivation to be interested in positional strategies. So here there are several authors. Brajdi, Brojek, Chatterjee, Doyen, Tessami, myself, and Singer, Kelmendi, Raskin, Gilonga. And there are also unconvincing proofs by other authors. What is very funny is that there was a first paper by Gillette for mean payoff games. And then Liggett and Lippmann, they wrote a second paper because they found a flaw in the Gillette paper. Okay. But then, with several co-authors, we read the proof of Liggett and Lippmann and we are not convinced at all. So I think... Okay, so so the mean payoff game case is covered by other work, but this reference is not very convincing. Okay, and how can you prove positionality? So we are interested in positionality of games. What tools do we have? So we have tools that I developed with my PhD advisor during my PhD thesis a long time ago. So the first one is a theorem by Gilonka and myself, which reduces somehow the problem from 2-player games to 1-player games, and it's like that. If every 1-player game equipped with a payoff function f or its opposite is positional, then every 2-player game as well. Okay? So if you have positionality for 1-player games, for f, n, so only for min or only for max, then you have positionality in games with min and max. Okay? So it's good because we can turn the study of positionality from 2-player games to 1-player games. And also a second theorem by myself. And it was, so when I was preparing the talk, so I had to write the year. So it was in 2007. So I realized it was a long time ago. So I somehow went into my memories to remember what the circumstances were. And I wanted to specify not only the date, but also the place. So I was in postdoc in Warsaw, and it was a very nice year. And also the conditions were very tough because at the time there was minus 25 degrees Celsius. Okay. So Warsaw is the perfect place to work because when it's minus 25, you just stay home and work your theorems. Okay. So second theorem is a theorem about one-player games, and it says that if your payoff function has two properties, prefix independence and submixing, then all one-player games equipped with these payoff functions are positional. Okay? And what are the two conditions? Prefix independence says that your payoff does not depend on finite prefixes. Okay? You can add a finite prefix, remove a finite prefix, your payoff does not change. So in all the examples I gave you, this is the case. Okay? If you compute the average value of a long sequence, you don't pay attention to finite prefixes, it don't matter. A submixing property is the second property, which says somehow that if you mix two sequences of finite words together, if you shuffle them, then the value of the shuffle is no more than the maximum value of the two original sequences. Okay? And again, all the examples I show you, they have this property. Okay? And these theorems were used successfully to study one-counter games. But they don't say much about half-positional games. And actually, half-positional games, they were addressed in the PhD thesis of Kopczynski. And Kopczynski showed that if a game is deterministic, so if there are no probabilities, prefix independent and submixing, and actually it has only two possible values, so the payoff function has only two possible values, then the game is half-positional. Okay? And what we did with Eden Kelmendi is that we generalized both results, okay, to get a result about half-positional stochastic games. And this is this result. We prove that if F is prefix independent and submixing, then every two-player game equipped with F is half-positional. Okay? So it generalizes both the result of Kopczynski and my previous result, and it covers all examples I gave you, and also many more. Well, many more is relative. But okay, so now I would like to specify the novelty in the proof, the technical difficulty we had to overcome to prove this. And first I would like to comment about, so it's about epsilon subgame perfect strategies. We have proved that prefix independent games, they admit epsilon subgame perfect strategies. What is it? Well, let me give you an intuition with this example again. So it's the same Parrish or published game. And what is very sad with the usual notion of optimal strategies is that you don't really exploit the weaknesses in the strategy of your opponent. So an optimal strategy for the referee is like this. If referee starts, he should write a positive review. Okay, he should write an okay review, like we said before. But if writer starts and he makes a suboptimal move, so instead of sending the paper to a conference, he sends it to a journal. And if the paper is routed to the referee, then it's still optimal for the referee to write a negative reviews. To ask for revisions. Okay. So, and you can check that this will guarantee the referee a payoff at least the value of the game. So he's not exploiting the wrong move of his opponent. So he's answering to a suboptimal move by a suboptimal move, but still it's optimal. Okay. And this is the opposite of subgame perfect strategies, because the subgame perfect strategy exactly tells you the contrary. Whatever the prefix is, you should still play epsilon optimally. Even so, you should exploit the mistakes of your opponent. So this is this definition. An epsilon subgame perfect strategy means that you play epsilon optimally whatever happens. So formally, if you fix a strategy sigma and a finite play, you can define the shift of the strategy like this. Sigma shifted by P applied to a play Q is sigma of PQ. And the strategy is epsilon subgame perfect if for all prefix P, sigma shifted by P is epsilon optimal. Okay, so in your strategy tree, whatever point you choose, you still have an epsilon optimal strategy. Okay? And so the lemma, the core lemma of the new result is that in every prefix independent game, so we are not using anymore the submixing condition, both players, they have epsilon subgame perfect strategies. Okay. So how much time do I have? Okay. Don't worry, I think I won't use the whole time slot I was given. I will just give you some intuitions and advertise for this result. The proof of existence of epsilon subgame perfect strategies relies on the notion of a weakness, which is intuitively a bad move of the opponent. Oh no, which is intuitively a situation where you don't exploit a mistake of your opponent. So simply, a finite play P is a weakness in a strategy sigma if sigma shifted by P is not 2 epsilon optimal. So I fixed an epsilon once for all, okay? And what do we use? We use the fact that plays can be factorized according to the occurrence of weaknesses during the play, okay? So each time you see a weakness, you cut your word, okay, and you factorize it like this, okay? And what matters is that this factorization can be computed online by the player, okay? And we use this factorization to define a new strategy. So we start from an epsilon strategy, optimal strategy, and we will turn it to a 2 epsilon subgame perfect optimal strategy in the following way. Each time a sigma weakness occurs, we reset the memory, okay? So the new strategy sigma hat, if it takes a factorized finite play like this, it applies sigma to the last segment. Okay? So each time you see a weakness, you forget everything. You forget it, and you reinitialize your epsilon optimal strategy from scratch. And what you can prove is that if sigma is epsilon optimal, it shouldn't be here. Then the reset strategy sigma hat is 2 epsilon subgame perfect. So for that, there is no need of a deep understanding of strategies in the game, but still you have to be tedious. And we are using mainly tools from martingale theory. So we use a notion of consistent strategies, which are strategies where you only play optimal actions. And for those consistent strategies, we show this property. So if you fix a stopping time with respect to the sequence of states, then if you consider this sequence, it converges because it's a submartingale. And you can also bound the expected value of this function by the value of your initial state. So actually, what you can do with that is that you can do surgery in your strategy. You can cut subtrees, plug new ones inside, and you can control the overall payoff when you are doing this surgery on the strategy. And you can prove that if the other key ingredient is that if sigma is epsilon optimal, then you can bound the probability of occurrence of weaknesses away from 1 and uniformly. Okay? And with those two ingredients, you can prove that the result strategy is epsilon subgame perfect. Okay? Why? Because you can prove that if you start from an epsilon optimal strategy sigma, then after some date n, you won't see any weakness anymore. Okay? And since you don't see any weakness anymore, then from that point on, the strategy is epsilon optimal. And here you can use your surgery tools to prove that your expected payoff is at least the value of the initial state minus epsilon. Okay? So that's the sketch of proof of the new key ingredient. And the rest of the proof is similar to the initial proof about one-player games. I just give you some intuition about it. Why did we need this new result? So the overall proof of positionality, of half positionality, relies on an induction on the size of the arena. And it's always the same story. You start from an arena, and you choose a state where there are two possible actions to do for the player one. Okay? And call it G, the state, and here you have a choice for player 1. You create 2 smaller games, G0 and G1. And in G0, you restrict the choice of player 1 to play left. And in G1, you restrict the choice of player 1 to be right. Okay? And now, what you want to do, you have, by induction hypothesis, you have 2 positional optimal strategies for player 1. You have sigma 0 in G0 and sigma 1 in G1. And both of them are optimal. And you know that if your theorem is true, one of these 2 strategies is actually optimal not only in G0 or G1, but also in J. Okay? So the point is, which one of them? You have to choose. And you have to prove that they are optimal. And for that, you have to use strategies of the opponent. And there, we use the existence of epsilon summing imperfect strategies for the opponent. So we choose an epsilon summing imperfect strategy for player 2 in G0, 1 for player 2 in G1, and we will combine them to get a combination of those 2 strategies of player 2 in J, denoted like this. And here you can prove that without loss of generality, you will have a pair of optimal strategies. So it will be either sigma 0 or sigma 1. And here you really need the argument of epsilon summing imperfection. So in the original proof, we had a stronger hypothesis about T0 and T1. We knew that they were positional as well, but actually you only need epsilon summing imperfection to conclude that this pair of strategies is optimal not only in G0 but in J as well, and that ends the theorem. Okay. Okay, so to conclude, we have a new generic result about half positionality of games. It can already be applied to generalize mean payoff games, so it's a new result. What we plan to do next is to study games with compact action spaces. So here probably we will. So we started talking about that with François Dufour from INRIA, which is specialized in games with infinite action space and infinite state spaces. And it would be nice to generalize this theorem to strategies with simple memory structures, with a less restrictive hypothesis and submixing, that the payoff being submixing. And that's it. Thank you for your attention. So we are not in the scope of FREC, but if you have questions.
Are there any questions? Yeah. I should give you this.
Yeah, you should either use the mic or I should repeat your question.
So do you have examples that you do not cover with this generic result? Where you can prove by hand or something in a different way?
I have some examples where you have to work just a bit to be covered by this condition, but I don't have examples where it's really useless. So. But still, it's not generic enough to really cover all the examples without any effort. But in every case, it's always a great help to use this machinery.
So if I'm not mistaken, you assume you need the fact that the game is prefix in the payoff function is prefix independent.
Yes.
And so do you have some ideas about games that are not prefix independent, where you can change the restriction to still have the theorem?
So in the deterministic case, for games with no probabilities, yes, because we even have with Wieczek Zielonka a characterization of positional games with deterministic transitions. But in the stochastic case, I don't have anything interesting to say. So if you remove the prefix independency, I don't know what to say. And the whole proof breaks down, actually.
Even for epsilon subgame perfect inform.
Especially.
Okay. Okay.
Any other question? Okay, so thanks again.